Wherever you are in the world or wherever you are on your journey, welcome to the Recovery Journey podcast with Horizon Behavioral Health, where we know recovery is possible and every day is a second chance. Are you struggling with substance use addiction or worried about a friend or a loved one? You're not alone in this fight. We're here with some special guests joining us from their unique place of recovery or a supportive role in helping others on their recovery journey. Hey, everybody that's joining us from close by or afar. Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to be talking about recovery, and I know our listeners are excited to meet with some of our special guests here today. We have Deborah Jefferson, CIT coordinator for Central Virginia, and a person blessed to be in long-term recovery. Thank you so much for being here, Deborah.
Thank you.
And we also have Tanya Dowdy. Tanya is a certified peer recovery specialist in Horizon's admissions department. Thank you so much for being here, Tanya.
Of course.
And last but certainly not least, we have Juliana Frosch, Horizon's medical director, who is also an adult psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here today. So I'd love to start the conversation off today. You know, we're here talking about recovery and treatment and just wanting to have an open conversation about, you know, what that looks like. We understand that the road to recovery looks different for everybody, right? And Juliana, I'm curious from a provider standpoint, you know, how do we tackle addiction? How do we look at addiction?
Well, I think it always starts with the patient's story and listening to it. Many people come in saying that they know they have an addiction problem. Other people come in with all kinds of other problems and suffering. And when you start listening to their story, you see that there is also, addiction as a piece of it. And so it's first identifying all of those elements that are bringing, suffering and disability to their life.
Absolutely. We often talk about how mental illnesses usually coincide with substance use addictions. Is that correct?
Well, there is certainly a high, degree of comorbidity is what we call it, but certainly that's true. And it's true, for folks that have medical illnesses as well. So, there are many, many people in the community, in every community that we're in, that are suffering with addiction.
And addiction, as we know it, is an illness that can impact anyone. Is that right, Juliana?
Absolutely. I think that, we all are exposed to many, many elements in our environment, things we eat, we drink, we breathe, that have dependence and tolerance as part of the dynamic, which means that the longer you use this substance or eat this food or whatever it is, the more of it you need to get the same benefit. And that if you stop doing it abruptly, you're going to have withdrawal symptoms. So we all really know what that's about in our life in some way or another. Coffee, for instance, is pretty benign, but still we have that dependence and tolerance. When addiction enters, the picture, you start seeing more behavioral problems, life interruptions, relationships disrupted, lots of things that are going on that are seeking the substance. So, that leads to oftentimes to recklessness or behavior that is not normal for that person, as well as trying to seek out the substance, using it in ways that is excessive.
I do really appreciate you sharing some of those things that our listeners can watch out for as we're thinking about, addiction can impact anybody. And that's across the lifespan, right, Juliana? We didn't get a chance to talk about,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are many people who, when they tell their story, it becomes very clear that they have been using addictive substances since they were small children, sometimes even. So it's, it certainly can happen anytime in life.
So you had made a comment about caffeine, and it kind of triggered me in thinking about, the connection with the brain, right? So how does addiction impact the brain?
Well, we know a lot more about, elements of our brain than we did years ago. And so we know that is kind of commonly called the pleasure centers of the brain. Our neurotransmitters there are complicated. And so, those are because we all have essentially the same brain, we all are, can certainly suffer from addiction problems when those receptors get flooded with substances. Um, it's, there's also some genetic changes, familial problems that different families have that certainly impacts it. Although we don't know exactly what that gene is, we do know that there's definitely genetics involved too.
From a provider's perspective, can the brain really heal from the impacts of long-term addiction?
Absolutely. I think, there are some cases, certainly, with alcohol, with some other substances, where we see long term disability for some people. But more and more, we see that the what's called the neuroplasticity of the brain is really an amazing thing, and that people do recover and recover lots of functioning that perhaps they lost, either cognitive functioning or motor skills, whatever has been affected by the substance use, that they actually can recover as they start healing their brain and taking care of their brain.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know those of us here at the table, as well as Horizon here serving residents of Central Virginia, we firmly believe, and not only do we believe it, we know it, that healing from an addiction is possible, no matter what that addiction is. So I would love to switch gears here and talk a little bit more with Tanya and Deborah, who are here with us, about their experience on their recovery journey and what healing looked like for them. So Deborah, where did your journey of healing begin?
I would say my journey of healing began on the real side when I was incarcerated. When I was in jail and had a moment of clarity to be able to sit down and realize this is not the life that I want to live anymore. And then, I was blessed to go to treatment. And I actually went to treatment at a RISE residential program, which was our residential program. Back then, we were called Central Virginia Community Services, and now we're Horizon Behavioral Health. But that's where I was blessed to go to get into a treatment program in-house.
And how about you, Tanya?
My recovery journey started at Horizon also. I had DSS come knock at my door. Hadn't been living right, and they had, they just put me on a path that, I had no choice but to go down, if I wanted my child back. So I went to IOP at,
and what is IOP?
IOP is intensive outpatient. It's a program that Horizon offers for not just substances, like hard drugs or whatever. It can also be for alcohol. We have a lot of VASAP. I actually sit in and help facilitate our IOP program 3 days a week. And it's 3 hours a day. And that's kind of my way of giving back. Because, you never think you're going to get addicted to anything, and when you do, it's a surprise, and then you get caught up in it, and then your world crashes. And although I was forced to go and do all of these things, it saved my life.
Yes.
At the end of the day. So I wanted to turn all the tables. So 4 years ago, when I started my recovery journey in IOP, I was fortunate enough to have a facilitator at the time that related to me. And she saw that I was, struggling with being in the program because I thought I wasn't, like everyone else. And she is still my therapist to this day. So, that's where mine started, at Horizon in about April of 2020.
And you recently just celebrated a milestone in March, is that correct?
4 years.
4 years.
Yes.
Good
Thank
for you.
you.
It's wonderful to hear that. And you mentioned that you had somebody there, a facilitator, that was able to relate to you.
Yes.
So now in your role at Horizon as a certified peer recovery specialist, what is it that you're able to provide to individuals that are seeking treatment?
I provide a real lived experience, not only with addiction, but with mental health, because through my addiction and my journey in recovery, I learned that, I had other stuff going on, that I had just not dealt with ever. Like I'm uh, ADHD, I've got health issues, like diabetes, stuff like that, that I just was ignoring my whole life. And when I started dealing with that also, it made my recovery journey a little more uh, easy, I would say, I guess. And when I get into IOP and I listen to the people that are in there and their stories and their struggles, especially the women that are, having to deal with DSS and CPS with their own children, because it's traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
It's traumatizing when they come and take your child. And it's just, I can relate. I've been there. So I think as a voice to say, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
I recently,
Mm-hmm.
I know what you're going through. It made me take everything a little more serious, and wanted to make a difference. And this was my goal, I was like, I saw them because it was at Cortland when I did my IOP, and they all had these badges or whatever. And I was like, I want one of those one day. So that's what I did. I just worked until I got me a badge.
That's amazing. And to have the determination to get there and to receive that certification, as I understand it, there's a lot of hours that go into.
Yes, you have 500 hours. And then you have to go through the course. It's a 72-hour course, but I think mine lasted about a week, almost 2 weeks. And I did it virtual, and, it just teaches you about the ethics of it and the professional side of, being in this position. I can sit here and talk all day about my addiction and how it went and the street side of it, if you will. But to be on this side of it is, it's very valuable.
Yeah. I can only imagine. And I'm sure Deborah is sitting here thinking, I wish that there was a Tanya there the day that I walked in the door. Before I had to.
It wasn't a Tanya there.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was blessed to go to treatment, almost all of the counselors were in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
They were all certified substance abuse counselors, and they could so identify with what we were going through. And they had lived experience. So they weren't called peer recovery specialists, but that's what they were.
It's such an important piece to bridge, right? Our, recovery community, which we all know we need community to maintain a healthy lifestyle, right? And to help us, forge positive behaviors that are going to benefit us, right? And then to have you in that position where you can bridge the recovery community on the treatment side together is just, I can only imagine how much that helps somebody that's trying to navigate all those resources and what exactly treatment means and what's going to be a good path for them. Tanya, you had mentioned that when you started treatment, you realized that there was a ton of other things that were going unaddressed related to your physical, emotional, social health, right? And we've got Juliana here who, from the provider standpoint, as I understand it, we're able to provide some of those essential needs when it comes to healthcare in addition to that treatment. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, I've been really proud of a program we have in admissions where we do have registered nurses as well as a physician, medical physician in our admissions program, and who helps us to really look at all aspects so that we get a holistic picture of what do these folks need, and help to bridge them to the medical care that they need. All of the nurse practitioners in the clinics and the physicians in the clinics as well do a lot of referring to appropriately to, neurology or endocrinology or cardiology if need be, but we help folks navigate that because it can be overwhelming when your health is, there's layers to problems you have. And the, mental health problems, anxiety, depression are, a high level of comorbidity with substance use for sure. A lot of people tell us that, they have been anxious all their life. And in some way that was a piece that got them to the substance use, perhaps. And so, we try to really address that you can find other ways of managing it that are so much more tolerable and so much more effective.
And if I could just say that actively using, you're not looking at anything else. You're not looking at your mental health, your physical health, or anything. When you're actively using and consumed, you're always trying to get one more. You're not thinking about going to a doctor or any of those things. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I think it's really a part of being really attuned to the patient's pace. What do they need at what time? And when is it, when can we offer what we can offer?
And the holistic approach to being worked with or working with people with the disease of addiction is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because, the holistic approach is what gave me a feeling of worthiness again, which encouraged me to change my life and to embrace that I was worth it to make a difference in my life. And when I was in treatment, one of the counselors said to me, which was my biggest shot of hope. She said, Deborah, you're not a bad person, but in your process of trying to get one more, you do some awfully bad things. And boy, did I need to hear that, because my spirit was already so broken. I was already feeling like a no good nobody, Here I am, a college educated woman, but I can't stop using, So that encouragement was a lifesaver for me.
So, Deborah, I'd love to hear more about your journey. And, we talked a little bit about where that began for you. But could you share with us, who or what had the most impact on you in your early recovery journey?
I would say my biggest impact was my family, my children, and that therapist that gave me that shot of hope.
Yeah.
And Gabriella, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Mm-hmm.
I was tired of being in this vicious fight within, because I wanted to stop. I wanted to change my behaviors, but I just couldn't by myself. And so that was one of the things that, I wanted to become a good mother again, a good friend, a good daughter, a good sibling. And by good, I mean a healthier one. And the one thing that I want to say about this gift of recovery, not only does the individual like me get in recovery, but my family and friends also can recover, and that's what has been so amazing for me,
What was it that your family said or did to kind of help support you in that phase of,
my family was a praying family. Even though they didn't understand and they were like, what the world is this girl doing? Disappearing, being irresponsible, all those things. My dad, I remember him saying, I think I had gotten about 2 years clean and been in recovery about 2 years. And he said, girl, my knees were hurting. I just was praying and praying, but I never stopped praying. And they prayed for me. And I think that was prayer works. And I needed prayer. And they didn't know what else to do. But you know,
Tanya,
and the other thing is, they didn't talk down to me. They just tried to keep encouraging me through the process, even though sometimes, I know they were embarrassed, or people coming and saying they saw me, or whatever. But they never really enabled me, except I must say, I was missing a lot of family events, like reunions and things. And I remember one time one of my cousins said, "Yeah, your mom said that you were at work, when I didn't make the reunion." Y'all, I didn't have a job. But she didn't want to say she's out there in the world of insanity. So, they sometimes made up excuses for me. But
and that's okay, right? I mean, what would you say to some families that are in that position, that they're uncomfortable, their loved one is struggling, and they just don't know what to say or do?
They don't know what to say or do. And what I often will say to families that I work with over the years is just try to be as supportive as you can be. And I know sometimes we burn every bridge possible when we're actively using, but I encourage them to not, like, for instance, don't give them money. You know what they're going to do with the money. If they say they got to pay a bill, then take the bill and pay for it. If they say that they need food, go to the grocery store and get the food. So that's one of the things that I always, because money is such a huge trigger. My first 9 months in recovery with a college degree, I did not seek employment, making real money. I worked for a temporary agency for my first 9 months in recovery. That's how bad I wanted something different. And that's how bad I surrendered. And also, I did not pick up my paycheck. My sponsor, my sister, my parents, because money was such a huge trigger for me. Money has a tendency, as we say in recovery, to have lips on it and start talking to you. It'll be all right to spend me this way, in your own voice even. And so I knew to take responsibility with that.
So what are some other triggers? And, we're definitely going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that stick out to you when you kind of recall back to your journey that's gotten you here today. And, what are some things that you have put in place in your life to help you respond to triggers when they come up?
Well, I'm just real mindful of people, places, and things.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, my whole journey is completely different from Deborah's. I isolated myself. It was me and my husband, and I just didn't associate with family. We were very functioning. We always had a roof over our head. We always had money. He was dealing drugs. I did hair for 25 years before I switched careers, and I had a business inside my home, and, I just shut everybody out. I kept it all in, and so he ended up going to prison. And that was shortly after DSS took our daughter. And so I was alone, completely alone. I had burnt all the bridges. I had, and I was embarrassed, and I didn't want to listen to it from my family because I never asked them for anything. I never, I wasn't homeless and, jobless and all, I was very functioning, but I wasn't. You think you are, but you're not. And, when my oldest daughter, she said to me, "Mom, you have more support than you think you have if you just stop." And so that's what I did. I have 2 older girls, and then there's a gap, and I have a 15-year-old. And so they became my 2 older children, they became a really big support system for me in early recovery. And then I started, developing a relationship with my mother again that had been estranged for a while over some stupid stuff. It always is some stupid stuff that you look back and you're like, what in the world? So I had to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thing.
Absolutely.
I had to completely surrender and just fall apart, emotionally, and get it all out. And then I was like, okay, here we go. We're going to do this recovery thing and I'm going to get my kid back. And, I'm hoping that my husband is, doing the recovery thing in prison and, maybe when he gets out, we'll figure things out, but I've got to do this. I've got to do this. So triggers for me, I don't really have triggers because it destroyed my life so bad. My main thing was I wanted to know why. I wanted to get into the mental health part of it. So I went back to school because my recovery started about 2 weeks before COVID hit. Schools closed. I was literally by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I just threw myself into school. And hopefully some point this year, I'll get my bachelor's in human services. But I take every class. I take every, go to conventions. I just keep educating myself. And sometimes I feel like maybe I've traded one for another, but I feel like it's okay,
That's a good trade.
Yeah. So it's, I don't really have triggers. And when I do, it's weird things, that I'm like, ugh, whatever, and I just keep moving on. It's a matter of unlearning, letting something have power over you like that, for me. And that's what I've done. I just stay focused on my family. My husband and I are back together. He got out of prison and we're both clean. We're in that little percentage of people that recovered together.
That is amazing.
Of course, I have my daughter back and we have our grandchildren, 2 grandchildren.
Wow.
Pretty much all the time. So it's like I've turned all my tables.
Wow.
If I can just get this degree over with, I'll be done. I'm not getting any younger.
And I would just like to say, it's not that I don't have triggers, but the longer you've been blessed with this,
Yes,
I have accepted there are no excuses to pick up and use.
yes.
I don't care what happens.
Mm-hmm.
The dog, I'm sorry for pet lovers, the dog died, the husband leave, whatever. I've had, both of my parents have passed away during my recovery. But my biggest gift was for them to see me.
Yes.
Change my life. And to become a productive, responsible member of this society again was the biggest gift ever. So I have no excuses. And I don't play the little pretty parts of my active use. In my head, if something is going to possibly be a trigger, I play the dirty, raunchy, struggling, nasty parts of that lifestyle. In my head. But, I'm responsible for my recovery.
Yes.
And I have to be mindful of that every day, so.
Yeah, through
and
recovery,
just being real
you
with
get to
people.
know you.
Yes,
you get
right.
to know you, and you get to know what. I never was a drinker. My grandfather, my father, alcoholism runs through my family, but I know me when I drink. And
I'm going to go looking for something else.
Yeah, it's just not a good combo.
Yes.
So, you become responsible for your own recovery and, it's just that simple.
And I don't have any problem disclosing about my gift.
Yeah, me neither.
You know what I'm saying? The shame and the guilt and all of that is long gone.
Yeah.
And I treat this thing as a gift.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Recovery is such a gift, but also a gift that you both have worked so hard to achieve and continue to work at, I'm sure, each day, right?
Yeah.
I would love to touch on something that you both mentioned, and that was just talking about the feelings of embarrassment that either you felt or a family member felt. I think we've both touched on both of those things. And I imagine that in a lot of cases, it's that embarrassment that we know comes from stigma, right? That prevents so many people from coming through our front doors and, seeking help, treatment help. And I'd love to just talk with Juliana about, what might you share with some individuals that maybe in a place of feeling that embarrassment and are, because of it, hesitant to reach out for help? What is it that they can expect when they come to Horizon, for example? Do we provide some sort of an assessment that a provider is able to then, help to understand where a person's at?
Well, all of the providers, nurse practitioners, and physicians, and the nurses as well, because they spend a lot of time with our patients too. We all, want to listen to the story.
That's right.
And the story can start at birth for some people, and later on for others, it's how they want to tell the story. So there's not a demand that you're going to answer these 50 questions, because we will get the answers to things that we're wondering about by hearing what they have to say. Some people really want to talk about their life and how they feel, and for other people it's much harder. So we can help with that, and it isn't something that we have to do all the first time we meet somebody, because that's unrealistic too. So it's the start of a relationship.
That's right.
And we all really value those relationships. I think I can really say very honestly and truly that I think all of the nurse practitioners, physicians, and nurses that I work with really do love what they do, and they remember people, for years and years and years, who have succeeded and gone on and don't need us anymore. Because I hear those stories from my staff every day about, they saw somebody on the street, and the person
That's right.
came up to them and and said, "Hey, do you remember me? I was at the detox unit. Do you remember me? I was," and how much help that they had received, and how much they still thought about us. So that is so rewarding. That really makes our jobs worthwhile. So a lot of people are success stories. And, of course, then there are a lot of people with sad stories, and we have to grieve with them over those things that have happened to them, or things they've done, or things that they're looking at coming up in their life. We become part of their team.
And I'd just like to say, as a provider, which I am, the non-judgmental, the aura, the welcoming of our staff with people, that helps remove the embarrassment. Because often I always used to say to newer clinicians, you know what? These people's spirit is already broken. They don't need any help from us with that.
Yeah.
We need to be welcoming, encouraging the best we can, so I think that's real important. And I must say, Juliana, that our staff at Horizon Behavioral Health are very welcoming and very empathetic,
Yeah.
and compassionate and passionate.
I think they have a genuine desire to, help people, is what I've seen, in my walking up and down the hallways and in every floor. Because like I said, I work on the admissions floor, and then I go down and I'm on the IOP floor, and it's everyone is there to help.
And that's the lifesaver.
Yes.
The way we as staff present to the people that come in is the lifesaver.
Yeah.
It's the life changer.
Mm-hmm. Save time.
So
Well, I think this is as good of a time as any to note that this is completely unscripted for all of our listeners out there. Promise that none of this was on the talking guidelines that we went over before today. But on a serious note, I do think we owe it to the providers out there, not just in our community, but across the nation, who are really pouring out of themselves to serve others. And to hear you both come from a place of you had already experienced it, and to be so passionate about the way your life was able to be turned around because of your own hard work, but also because of the help of others. And then to want to pour back into that field and serve others in that same way is amazing. And it's so encouraging to know that that's what's happening here in Central Virginia. That's what's happening around the world. And so when people do reach out to ask for help, that they know that there's people that have experienced what they're going through, and that when they knock on the door and they say, "Hey, I'm ready," that's who's answering the door. It's not, a cold, it's not a cold place where people just don't get it, but they're going to try to do their best. It's people who really, truly care. So thank you all so much for sharing that perspective, and thank you for what you do each day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just looking at all the strength that you all found in this journey. Now, how many years of recovery were we celebrating today at this table in this room between the two of you guys?
4 and 30.
Yeah.
That's amazing to hear. And I'd love to know a little bit about, you're obviously still on a journey, right? That our journeys never end. And so tell us a little bit more about what you're able to do now that, you've experienced a lot. And we talked a little bit about your role as a certified peer, Tanya. How about you, Deborah, in your role as CIT coordinator in Central Virginia?
Well, it's a very unique position for me in my life because as the CIT coordinator, the Crisis Intervention Team coordinator, part of what I do is coordinate and facilitate training with law enforcement, first responders, mental health on how to de-escalate and work with people who may be in crisis with addiction or with mental health. And the thing, and it's a 5-day training that we do, and I oversee the CIT site. But what is very unique and what I often share in every group is, this is truly a spiritual thing for me to be in this position, because I ran from the police for 25 years. And now I am up front training you, working with you every day. And so that is very powerful.
Yeah.
And to be able to be working for 25 years at the place where I went to treatment is another powerful thing. So, my life is good. Every day is not a happy day, but every day is better than the way it used to be, so,
I love hearing about your life after treatment and just hearing all the different ways that you've challenged yourself, going back to school, leading different programs that are serving individuals in the community. Help our listeners that are tuning in, whether they are struggling with something themselves, know somebody who's struggling. What would you share to give them some hope about what life after treatment and in recovery can look like for them?
I always like to give people the shot of hope with just 3 words. Recovery is possible. That's a shot of hope right there. That recovery is possible. You got to go through some surrendering and some sacrifices and all that to make it happen. And also to know that there are resources out here available.
Yeah. That's something I didn't know.
Yes.
In coming to Horizon, in my early recovery, that happened for me. Like it was, I finally found help, and, it was just like you said, I was sick of being sick and tired all the time. And just to know that there were the amount of resources, housing, med-assisted management, just counseling, just by itself, counseling, therapy, the mobile crisis unit. These things are out there, and as peers, that's what we do. We tell people, and this platform is a perfect way to do that, because you don't, in that state of mind, you don't think there's any hope. No.
And the other thing, I'm just going to ask Juliana to share about this. It's not like it used to be. It used to take 30, 60 days for someone to be able to get in to see a provider.
Right.
Things are different. Am I correct, Juliana?
Oh, yeah. We definitely have some fast tracks and to seeing nurse practitioners, seeing physicians. We have some, a process now where folks, if they walk into admissions and one of the first questions is going to be about, are you an opiate user? No, it's not presented as a judgment in any form or anything, a scary question. It's simply, are you? And then let's talk about that first. And because that's life threatening. And we want to get those folks to help that day. So
that's right.
And, we have tools and medications now that can save lives for opiate dependence. That's, life changing. I mean, lots of people may have goals about, where they want to live and the kind of life they want to have and restoring relationships. But, the fundamental goal initially has got to be to live, right?
That's
and
right.
We lose too many people to addiction, to overdose, and most overdose that occurs is a combination of drugs. It's not one drug. So asking those questions right from the start and trying to let people know we want to save your life today, and then we'll move on to all the other things that are possible.
So, Juliana, we talked a little bit about how do we address, people's hesitation to reaching out and utilizing those resources and asking the questions, or even, having a conversation with somebody who you think may benefit from those resources, because it feels like a hard conversation to bring up, right? I think, and I hope that Deborah and Tanya will jump in here, is some of that hesitation may come from the idea that committing to treatment, like committing yourself to, I am ready to do this. Like, I'm going to stop. Yeah.
It's scary.
It feels like a huge step. But from what I'm hearing from everybody at this table is that it's just one step forward. And all that one step does is put multiple other people right behind you, so that when you take the second step, you feel that much stronger and prepared to keep walking and moving forward. So I'd love to talk about, what happens if somebody comes in and they took that first step and they did it for themselves, but something happens and they relapse, or, the treatment isn't going as planned, and, this happens, that happens, and, that happens.
That's a really big part of my job. What I do on a daily basis is I call every intake appointment that we have the day before, and I encourage them to come in, and I, leave messages, and I talk to them. Because you can tell in someone's voice, that they just really might not want to come in and do all this, and so I try to encourage them to come in and just see what we have to offer, because a lot of times that's all it takes to get if you can just get them in the door and get them seated in the clinician's, office, and I'll go in. If I know that I've talked to somebody the day before that's struggling, or, has, I'm partial to DSS cases because I know about it. And it's, like I said, it's scary. So I will put myself in that room as someone who knows what they're going through. And I will let them know. That's the thing about recovery, that I had to learn. You can't be embarrassed of it. You have to own it and move forward. And because if you stay in it, it's just holding you back.
And the other thing is, you can't keep what you have.
Right. It's
unless you freely give it away.
Yes.
So, it's little lines like that you learn in recovery in your meetings that's so impactful.
Yes.
Somebody say, Deborah, you can't keep that. You got to share that. It's like the testimony.
Yes.
You gotta give it back.
Yeah. Well, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this. I mean, it matters to us too.
Yes.
So.
Well, and I think too, we all, relapse is part of recovery.
Yeah.
We all are gonna, have had that experience of patients that come in, or even sometimes they haven't come to the appointment, they've missed an appointment. A family member calls, or a case manager goes to their house and finds, that they've relapsed with substances. They're either, don't want anything to do with us, or they are afraid to come tell us, or they feel guilty, whatever. We just start from where you are, because, and a lot of times patients will say to me, you're not upset. And I'm like, I have nothing to be upset about. What I'm glad about is that we're talking about this,
and that you're alive to be able to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. That we're here in this place, and we start from here. And every relapse has a lesson with it, for everybody, not just the patient, but for those of us that are working with them. We learn from those experiences.
So I'd love to go around the table, and if you could just share with me in one word, what does recovery mean to you?
Health.
Hope.
Life.
I'd like to thank each of you for being here today, on behalf of Horizon and our listeners, for being a part of today's discussion and encouraging our listeners to reach out and take advantage of resources and the people out there that want to support them. And I hope that our listeners that are listening that may be in a place where they're not sure if they're ready to take that first step, I hope that you will. I hope that you now know that there are people that want to walk alongside you in this journey of recovery that's ahead for you, and that you do not have to do that alone. I hope that there's also those listening that will go on today with the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and challenge yourself to have difficult conversations in hopes that that next thing that you might say, or that one word of encouragement that you might give, could change the course of somebody's life. And so I hope that you'll go about your day doing that. To the rest of our listeners who have tuned into today's episode, let's not let the discussion end here. Go home, have these conversations with your friends, your families, and in your communities. And as you do, know that we are here celebrating recovery alongside you, loudly and proudly.
Thank you for joining us on the Recovery Journey podcast with Horizon Behavioral Health. Remember, our greatest triumph is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fall. If you live in Central Virginia and you or a loved one is ready to reach out for help, call Horizon today at 434-477-5000 to schedule your first appointment. Let us walk this journey with you, and together we can find hope and healing on the horizon.